Thank you very much for watching us. Joining us here in Canberra is Fiona Scott. She is the Liberal member for Lindsay. Nice to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
All right, joining us, well, who's going to fight for the big chair? I'm not there. Will it be none other than comedian, broadcaster, big brain, beautiful Peter Burner, or the delightful Janet Albrechtson, who hit it out of the park today in the Oz? Hello, guys. I think we eventually say hello, and then we're going to get Darren Hinch of yours, who's back as part of the chat. Janet, straight up, what did you think of Arthur Sinodinos and his decision today to stand aside, to frankly burst the bubble, to make sure that the scandal that was in and around, real, imagined or otherwise, was going to distract the government?
Well, you know, there are lots of things that I really dislike about politics, and I guess this is one of the things that I dislike the most, and that is when a politician of, you know, someone's calibre like Arthur Sinodinos has to fall on his sword when there's been no allegation made against him, no claim made against him, but he has to do so for political reasons. Look, he did the right thing, but I was interested to see Bill Shorten get up in Parliament today and say, well, what has changed in the last 24 hours? He asked that question to Tony Abbott. I'll tell you what's changed in the last 24 hours, and that is that the Labor Party has decided to ramp this up and play it for all it's worth. Now, you know, maybe that's what an opposition does, but let's remember, even, you know, Senator Faulkner has said there is no suggestion of corruption against Arthur Sinodinos, none whatsoever, and yet he's had to fall on his sword. I think it's disgraceful that this thing happens.
Well, here's part of what the Assistant Treasurer had to say as part of his stepping aside. He hasn't quit Parliament or anything like that. He's just out for the next couple of weeks until he eventually does give the evidence at the ICAC, the Independent Commission Against Corruption in New South Wales. Here is Arthur Sinodinos in Canberra earlier today.
I've been called as a witness to the ICAC, and as I've said on the public record on numerous occasions, I'll be cooperating with the inquiry. I do not want this sideshow to be an unnecessary distraction to the important work of the government, which I am proud to serve. Whilst this process is underway, I will therefore be standing aside as Assistant Treasurer.
And as Janet just mentioned, the back and forth between the Prime Minister and Opposition Leader was worth noting. Here's part of Question Time today.
Yesterday, the Prime Minister said that he had full confidence in Assistant Treasurer Sinodinos. Today, Senator Sinodinos is no longer the Assistant Treasurer. Prime Minister, what changed in the last 24 hours?
And what we see here is a member of this parliament doing the right and the honourable thing. Doing the right and the honourable thing, which is what you'd expect from someone like Senator Sinodinos, who has given this country given our country such long and faithful and decent service.
Now, Darren, a lot of us have well, I've copped it in the past 24 hours that I was waving my arms around when it was Craig Thomson before we knew what the totality of the allegations were against him, yet I haven't done the same for Sinodinos. Do you think that it's one and the same, that if there's a whiff and a claim, regardless of what it is, you should get out of the way, or does the difference of the claim matter?
No, look, two things. I think that Sinodinos should have stood aside. I think he did the right thing, and he should stand aside until it's heard. We've had other cases where people like Premier Neville Rand stood down when he was Premier, when he had allegations made against him. That even was much worse. But in this case, he is going to be a witness for ICAC. ICAC, Lord knows what it's going to turn up, and I think he was right, did the right thing to stand aside. He should not have resigned. I think that was a real extra push by Labor. But I want to mention something else. You mentioned the Craig Thomson case. I was incensed today by that his wife, Zoe, saying about he's sorry, and the way Tim Webster put it in the news that he's apologised, she apologised on his behalf, he's sorry. He's only sorry, she says, for the hurt he caused his family, his friends and his supporters. What about the bloody hospital workers, those poor mugs on $15 an hour, whose money he stole to pay for hookers? He has not said sorry to them once in all these years. He's lied to Parliament. The man is a scumbag, and I think that sort of thing saying, oh, pull on your heartstrings for poor Craig Thomson, I hope he goes inside.
Yeah, well, I hope so too. I hope so, very much so. We'll get to all of that in a second. Particularly, look, obviously his wife's going to say that, fine and fair enough, and it's a difficult one because it involves his missus. But the straight up and down is he himself has to say sorry rather than anything else. But Fiona, your team took a hit today. Do you think it was the right thing? Is it a day late? Should he have punched on for another week? What did you think of Arthur Sinodinos?
Look, I thought it was really disappointing because Arthur is one of our strongest team players, and I agree with the sentiments of so many people today who have sung Arthur's praises. He's a noble man that served our country well, and I mean, I think it goes to a testament of the government that he he has stood aside because he doesn't want the distraction to be there. We have important legislation that we're trying to get through the Parliament, trying to get through the Senate, and Arthur doesn't want to be the middle of a three-wing circus, which is a very different thing than what the previous Labor government did.
But isn't the mistake the issue is that everyone has known this is coming, it's coming for some time. If you follow Kate McClumott's reporting or anyone else's, capable, decent man. Should he have been in the ministry, though? At this point, should they not have waited until there was a reshuffle later?
I think you should always play with your A-team. And Arthur's career, his service to the former Liberal Prime Minister John Howard, his experience in the private sector, I mean, wouldn't you want this man as the Assistant Treasurer of our country? In fact, it was the Labor Party that was wondering why he wasn't the Finance Minister, and now it's inconvenient for them. Why is he now stepping aside? So, look, I think he's a very strong player, and he's someone that we definitely need in the Treasury portfolios.
But Peter Berner, would you be willing to admit publicly that an Obeid family member may or may not have been in the audience watching your act over the years?
Oh, look, I wouldn't be surprised if they had been. I've seen large numbers of tickets sold with no one in the seat, so I'm always suspicious. Look, I can't add anything to what anybody said about Arthur Sinodinos. I think he's read not only the mood of the Parliament, but quite frankly the mood of the people who, if another politician was seen to sort of kick and scream and not stand aside, we would have just exhaled completely and passed out through I don't know, frustration with the whole thing. I wouldn't be surprised if many children born in the next 2 weeks will be called Arthur.
Now, what about Janet? What Darren was saying? Let's talk about Craig Thompson here. This bloke, you know, he wants to say. I mean, he himself is not saying sorry. It gets said through the lawyer, and the reason it's happening is to try and push down whatever potential sentence is coming his way. But this bloke has literally, metaphorically, kicked and screamed and been dragged to the whole process. He didn't help the union when it was investigating. He didn't help Fair Work Australia. He didn't help the police. He pled not guilty. He chose to go for a judge-only trial, not a jury trial. He was eventually found guilty. Oh, but suddenly, apparently, the reason he went to hookers was to find comfort. I know his wife thinks he's a good bloke. I would hope that most wives think that of their husbands, but too little, too late.
I completely agree, and I agree with what Darren said. This man did not apologise for the money that he defrauded health workers of. 65 counts of fraud he was found guilty of. He hasn't apologised for that at any stage. It's not good enough for the wife to say he's sorry for, you know, the angst that he's caused his family and friends and supporters. The salient fact for the court to consider, as it determines what kind of penalty is imposed on him, is that he has shown no contrition. That's all that matters here.
Well, and also, Darren, what was a key part of his defence was there was all of these fanciful things that basically his main defence that was offered to the courtroom was, oh, I could get away with it because it was the Wild Wild West. Well, that's not what he told the judge as part of his defence. He's now trying to offer up all these emotional and I was under pressure and blah, 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 wah, 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 that he's serving up because he's a chance of going to jail. It's extraordinary.
Paul, this is very personal, but when I was very sick and was in hospital, and before I had the liver transplant, leading up to that, it was about in that 5-year period that Thompson was in the gun for what he'd done and the money he'd taken and all the hookers and the personal expenses. And I remember looking at hospital workers there, and they're the lowest paid people. I said $15 an hour, and they are there. And I remember being in hospital bed one day, and this woman came in, and she's a middle-aged, Middle Eastern woman, not much English, and she's there. Somebody's colostomy bag had burst on the bed next to me, and she's there with a bucket and a mop, slopping up somebody's mess from the floor. And I thought then, in the middle of all this, it would cost probably 2 full weeks of her wages a year would go to pay for her union fees, and he was dragging $500 at a time out of the ATM and paying $1,000, $2,000 for hookers. And I thought, what this man did to those workers was an absolute disgrace.
Absolutely, and I hope that the judge comes down about as hard as they possibly can. All right, quick break, back with more. We've got plenty to talk about with Love Across the Country. Be part of the show with all of these lovely people. Feel free, just go searching for us at PM Live, and otherwise you can get in touch with us via Facebook too, which is Paul Murray Live. More in a sec.